All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our NAACP Environmental Justice Committee Getting to Know web series, where we're going to host part 4 of our quarterly web series. We're really excited about this conversation. Glad everyone is able to join this evening. We have an amazing list of panelists who are going to be speaking with us this evening. We're actually still waiting for some of our panelists to come in, so if you all can just be graceful with us, we'll get started here shortly. But we have uh, slated to have Miss Kristal Hansley, who is the founder and CEO of a company by the name of WeSolar. She's actually the first African American woman in the country to own her own community solar company. So she's going to be sharing with us what that experience has been like for her in the community of Baltimore, where they are located. We also have Representative Rachel Hood. We're excited to have her on as well to kind of speak to this from a more um, political level, from a legislative level, kind of help us understand what what the opportunities are, what's at stake in her space, and then we also have one of our NAACP peers from the San Diego um, branch of the NAACP. Her name is Jacquelyn Clark, and she's the Environmental Justice Chair for the NAACP San Diego branch. So, with that said, we're extremely excited to have our panelists this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started here shortly. We appreciate everyone's patience. So, just bear with us for a minute. We'll get started shortly. All right, Mr. Watson. Um, we're going to go ahead and get started here shortly. If you want to turn your camera on, we have Miss Jackie Clark as well as Representative Rachel Hood. I think what we can do is let's go ahead and just kick off the conversation, and then we'll bring Kristal in when she's able to join. How's that sound, Wesley?
Sounds pretty good.
And Wesley will be our moderator this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Miss Clark as well as Representative Hood in now, and you all can start the conversation.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to do a quick introduction. My name is Wesley Watson. I'm a member of the NAACP and also a member of the NAACP Environmental Justice Committee. And I also work for the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. And I just really appreciate everybody coming out tonight and joining this great conversation on community solar and the benefits of community solar. We have our amazing panelists. We have Jacquelyn Clark from the San Diego branch of the NAACP, and she is the EJ chair of that branch. And we also have State Rep Rachel Hood, who is an amazing champion on all environmental issues here in our Great Lakes state of Michigan, and always fighting for the people and always fighting for sustainable policies at the legislative level. We'll first open up introductions to State Rep Rachel Hood, then we'll kick it off to Ms. Jacquelyn Clark.
Hi there. Thank you, Wesley. It's great to be here with you and to be with Jacquelyn Clark as well. Nice to meet you virtually, Jacquelyn, and glad everyone is here watching if you're taking the time. I have served the 76th House District in the city of Grand Rapids for the last 3 years and am continuing to run right now for my third term in Michigan's legislature. I serve in the State House on the Appropriations Committee and work on appropriations for agriculture and natural resources, also the school aid and Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, which touches on some environmental justice and certainly health justice issues that are related to the environment. Before joining the legislature, I worked for about 20 years in various capacities on advancing urban areas, advancing green infrastructure, green building, sustainable business practices in healthcare, and air and clean water. And then a little bit of time working on infrastructure solutions with, of course, that sustainability and climate resiliency lens carried along with me. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll kick it to Jacquelyn next.
Hi, it's very nice to meet you also, Ms. Representative Rachel Hood from Michigan. So my name is Jacquelyn Clark. As a citizen, I'm a county employee of San Diego for the last 20 years. And as a climate ambassador for the last 3 years is when I found out how important it is to pay attention to what's going on with our environment and to pay attention to the climate. So becoming a climate ambassador through the San Diego Urban Sustainability Coalition and I Am Green, I learned a lot, and it actually helped prepare me to take on the role of environmental and climate justice chair, even as a newbie in this gigantic field. So there's a lot to learn, and I'm learning a lot, and it's never ending. So currently serving in the role of ECJ chair, I've learned a lot about climate change, about air pollution, about air quality, about water pollution, about all the things that have a impact on our quality of life, but greatly impact communities of color, communities of concern, whatever term that is used that indicates that people of color are greatly impacted by these environmental and climate injustices, and working tirelessly to figure out ways that we can become more aware of what's going on and happening to us, so that we're just not relying on the people who are doing the great work as described by Representative Ms. Rachel and other people that are in this field, because more often than not, we're the last ones to know. So my goal is education. And thank you so much.
Thank you for that introduction, everybody. First question, I'm gonna kick it off to State Rep Rachel Hood to give a brief education on what is community solar and what are the benefits of community solar.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Community solar refers to a solar array located within a community where a minimum of 3 partners have come together to create a subscription service that allows citizens to receive credit on their utility bills for their share of the power that is produced in a given solar array, community solar array. So just as if the panels were on their own roof, residents can have access, small businesses can sign up to receive energy from a certain number of panels, which they can, buy as many or as much or as little as they need. And folks have immediate access through these community solar arrays. These are typically smaller solar arrays than what we would call a utility scale array. A typical solar array that a utility would put together would be 25 megawatts or more. And community solar will be as little as 5 megawatts, and anywhere between 5 and 20 typically is the size that we're looking at. So these are the types of solar arrays that might go on top of a business district. They might fit into the underutilized portion of a church's property or a school's property. These are arrays that we can tuck into our communities that can help us to take pressure off of the grid and at the same time help us to advance access to solar. I know in my home, we have a beautiful sycamore tree. We have looked at putting solar panels on the southern facing edge of our house, but we would have to take down our sycamore tree in order to justify it, which we don't want to do. It's a great asset to the house, helps us with cooling, helps us stay warmer in the winter and more. And so for us, a solar array would be a great way to gain access. It would be better actually because we wouldn't have to pay all of the upfront costs for the capital and community, and individual scale solar installation on our home. So this can also be used in low-income housing developments and a lot of other applications that make it cheaper, easier, more accessible, and give immediate access to people and their subscriptions for solar.
Thank you for that question. I have a follow-up question. Next is, are there any current good examples of community solar in Michigan?
Yeah, a couple of smaller municipal utilities have successfully established community solar arrays. One in East Lansing with the Lansing Board of Power and Light. It's a former landfill site that they could not develop traditional housing or any other community amenities on, so they were able to use it for community solar, and it has been a very successful project once established. Another one up in the Traverse City area with the Traverse area Cherryland Electrical Co-op. So both of these groups have been innovators. They have pushed through the really difficult kind of lack of regulations to help guide the establishment of community solar investments. The bill that I have in the legislature, along with my colleague Michelle Hoyninga, would call for the Michigan Public Service Commission to establish a clear program and clear protocol for establishing community solar projects, which would make it more accessible. It would take fewer lawyers to get this work done, and hopefully would spur a round of development across our communities that can benefit us and benefit our partners at the utilities by helping to ease some of the stress on the energy grid, which is currently causing us to have power outages. We're talking about brownouts over the summer already and preparing for those. Community solar projects properly placed can help to keep all of us in access to the energy that we need.
Thank you for that. I have another question later to go in a deep dive about the legislation piece, but I want to kick it to Jacquelyn to just talk a little bit of what she has seen on the ground in San Diego. And we understand when it comes to EJ issues, every community, particularly communities of color, see EJ related issues on the forefront when it comes to access to clean drinking water, or when it comes to lead contamination with lead paint or lead dust. Could you speak a little bit about what the efforts in the San Diego area to solve some of the EJ issues that you all are having in the San Diego area?
One of the main areas that we are trying and doing our best to address is that the city of San Diego, the county of San Diego, and most municipalities who have climate action plans or other type of environmental impact studies and data have already gathered the information, so they know the issues. But what is striking to us is that there is not enough funding that is clearly set aside to address these problems. So we're going after funding. We want in budgets the clear line items that address climate and environmental injustices with definitive projects that address them. So if we're going to talk about solar, since this is the topic of the conversation, let's say, for instance, with community solar and the fact that it's mentioned that about it being accessible and affordable. So who are the people that are going to be coming and a part of at least a three-party interest that are going to establish the community solar power? And then how will they set the cost to make sure that low-income families really do have a benefit from community solar? So if we're in the city of San Diego and we're trying to negotiate that with people who want to come and establish community power or community solar, we're going to say that instead of a traditional or maybe where they say 15 cents on the dollar, so using solar energy costs 85 cents, they're saving 15 cents. Can they save more? Because 15 cents for a low income family may not be as much or as powerful as saving 15 cents for your moderate and your higher income families. So we're trying to make sure that with legislation, with policy, with anything that's being done to say that we're going to do X, Y, Z, that there are smart goals in there that are really beneficial to these low income families. Anytime I hear low income, it's a trigger for me because I'm like, well, who are low income? What demographic makes up low income? And by the data, we know it's people of color, communities of color, communities of concern, all the same thing. It's when you hear those, they're changeable. So then how are they greatly affected by these things? And it's always due to accessibility and funding and the lack thereof. So if policymakers and legislators and those who are elected officials really want to move the needle, they have to do so with a pen and funding and make sure that there's a clear line item budget number, memo, whatever it is that they do in each state that clearly says we have funding and we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that the funding is enough and that it covers all aspects of whatever the project is that's being addressed to get it done. So those are the things that are meaningful and measurable, attainable, all of that. And without that, it's just talk.
Thank you for that answer. Well, Kareem, are you going to jump on? But I can introduce Kristal Hansley. Kristal Hansley is the founder and CEO of WeSolar. It's the first Black woman community solar project in the country. She based out of Baltimore, but originally from Brooklyn. Just really glad for you to join us today and just really speak on the first question I asked State Rep Rachel Hood about what is community solar. Can you answer that question for us as well? And also, after that question, just give a brief description of the mission of WeSolar.
Oh, yes. Thank you, everyone. My name is Kristal. I'm the founder and CEO of WeSolar Inc. Really pleasure to be here and joined by the esteemed panelists. And I'm sorry, I have to jump right in to, piggyback off of what Jacquelyn is saying. I concur. I've spent about 8 years now in the community solar space in the Mid-Atlantic region, and how community solar is accessible. And it took about 6 years for the Community Solar Act of 2015 to actually get passed, right? And another 4 years on top of that, bringing us 2018 until the project actually became into the implementation state. And then on top of that, the verification process for low to moderate income and what is defined as low income, and then the hearings and the work groups, another 2 years on top of that, because those distinct languages as far as what is low income, right? And how do we make it accessible? And therefore, how do we, verify low income? It was just a mess because of the vague language and the policy. But at the end of the day, if you're just trying to get something started, try to get something done, you don't want to write too much language to where it's too much pushback. So I see both sides. And what we've come up with, and now with the 22 other states, including the latest being New Mexico, that have some form of community solar legislation, and all 50 states have it, but we can argue whether it's vertically integrated and all that stuff, utility owned, independent developer owned, private owned, co-op owned. There's like 4 or 5 different models. But here in the DMV area, I would say is that they use the census tract language. So for the legislators that's on the call that want to really understand how to pinpoint and learn from the other jurisdictions as far as what's been working 10 years in on the other side of the country, is we'll model the language after what's at the federal level, right? So that there's already federal programming that have unique census tract language. If you fall into the census tract, you can automatically be considered low income if you receive SNAP benefits, if you receive Social Security benefits, SSI, SSDI, housing, vouchers, Section 8. That's all poverty level or slightly under, but those federal programs have been the mark as far as what we have seen for what qualifies as low income. And if you can get that right out the gate, then it would definitely save your grassroots and a lot of your organizations, environmentalist lobbying groups, EJ groups, a lot of time, 2-3 years on down the road. But yes, WeSolar, we're a full service development firm located out of Baltimore, Maryland. I have about 10 years prior to joining the renewable energy space on Capitol Hill. So I do have a policy background at the federal level. And I'm just, happy to be a part of this conversation. Prior to starting WeSolar, I launched on Juneteenth of 2020. I was with another startup, and the primary reason that I wanted to have my own agency, and literally agency as in the organization, but agency over my own ideas, is because there was just a lack of diversity, and also the language and the jargon that was being used, I can see was also a barrier, and the lack of cultural competency from the majority of the solar firms were deploying and implementing community solar just didn't resonate with communities of color. And so, Maya Angelou, if there's a book that you would like to be read or see and it's not there on the bookshelf, you have to write it yourself. And so, yes, I had to pull up my own table to do the work that I saw was the gaps in this new vertical in the solar space. And so WeSolar's mission, right, is to make sure that obviously community solar is accessible through the language and meeting the people where they are, because right now it's really technical. It can be really confusing, especially when you look at other energy, similar models that promise savings and all that stuff, and communities of color that have been at the forefront and the brunt end of environmental targeting and energy savings marketing that didn't later happen. We're a little skeptical as far as anything regarding our utility bills, and if it's not through the utility, what is this community solar? What is this? It sounds like a scam, too good to be true. So just cutting through all of that jargon and really advocating on behalf of the people through a grassroots style, community-led, community-owned. That is, and that has always been my approach from a community organizing lens. And so we're social, enterprise, doing solar development and also managing the solar subscriptions as we deploy more community solar, but coming at it from a community-centric lens.
Thank you for that brief background, and you have accomplished so much. You just spoke shortly on the time on the Hill, but you also worked under the great Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, and also worked under Eleanor Norton, and so have an amazing abundance of wealth and resources and knowledge at your hand. So thank you for joining this conversation. A question I asked State Rep Rachel Hood earlier, I want to get your answer as well, Kristal, on what have been some positive examples of community solar in the DMV area. Sorry, you got to unmute yourself.
I would say, as far as hitting the renewable energy goals, the statewide, and the immediate benefit is the savings, right? Obviously, it's jurisdictional in the sense that if you're comparing DC to Maryland, it's night and day, because the district has the highest REC credits, so you can pretty much not pay for solar on the residential rooftop side or the vertically virtual solar side, community solar. And so DC, because of the policies and the local incentives, you're able to build and have 50% off product offerings for community solar, which no other jurisdiction in the country can really compete with that. Rex in Maryland is probably going for about $70. And if you're in going further west or in the Bible Belt, there's like zero recs. And so that's where Jacquelyn is really is making sure that in order for you to do this, you have to incentivize the renewable energy sector, and you have to be intentional about renewable energy, or you just would not be able to compete with the dirty energy, because in order to really guarantee the savings, you have to at least undercut the market rate, right? And so if you're 13 cents per kilowatt hour, that's like average. Well, now it's up because of the markets, everything's crazy. But the main benefit is if you had community solar, now you're protected. Right now, everyone is seeing inflation and energy burden at all high costs. But if you had a community solar subscription, no matter what that retail baseline is, you're always going to be below. So if you was paying $100 each month, now the market rate goes up to $125. Now you're coming at $100. And so no matter what goes up, you're still going to suffer from inflation, but it's not like you're seeing that 50% rise for folks who had to pay the baseline without community solar, and now their bill goes up and they have no protection. So that, is huge, right? To have policies like community solar in place that can protect the most vulnerable communities against, crazy market swings. That's obvious. And then two, the equity component, whether you have a co-op model or community fund model, or even development or independent generation model, where you have the solar developer and you're part of that crowdfunding, and you're like a small business where the community owns, WeSolar, community owns parts of the project, the landowners, everyone in the community is a part of that equity. So in theory, it's like, wow, the community is now owning a part of their own, energy supply chain. When has that ever been possible since the Vanderbilts in the beginning of like the 19th century, and like the century is like the 1900s, all of this stuff was established and monopolized. And if you just couldn't get in, now we're independent generators and power operators, and regular folks can actually own a part of their utility. That is revolutionary and disruptive. So yeah, that is the second benefit in creating that economic resilience that's needed, right? Like a lot of things are not really stable, but knowing that you have ownership and assets like from the sun, that's making sure that that's a pretty stable investment compared to like what's out there in the market. But you have to be in a position to still take that risk. But I would say that those are the two main things. And obviously the decarbonization, we have to do something about it. And low-income families and marginalized families don't really feel like, they're part of the conversation, because they're not. And this is a great entry point to make sure that everyone is participating in the just transition to renewables. And because everyone with the utility bill can actually be an off-taker of community solar, now green power solutions isn't just for middle-class homeowners. Right now, apartment dwellers, millennials, Generation Z, boomers who are downsizing and don't need such a big home previously, they can also be a part of the just transition through community solar. And so I would say the inclusivity, the accessibility, the obviously decarbonizing your footprint is all the main benefits, and what's happening in the DMV from what's the implementation. But again, that is maybe like 5-6 years in after the legislation passed. There's definitely a learning curve that's associated with community solar, but any new jurisdiction that's like happening and doing, passing laws right now can definitely learn from our mistakes. Like getting integrated billing done right first, right? Like make sure that your community solar program is already in sync with the utility billing cycle. And now, you don't have to go through those hearing process and those moratoriums, or, ask for that through the Public Service Commission boards up front. And also, not, necessarily using the solar original solar paradigm as far as financing this project, there's been a lot of back and forth regarding how do you finance the projects themselves, right? Once you got the laws and able to enact community solar, do we model this off of traditional solar financing? No, because if you do that and you have these long 20, 25-year power purchase agreement models, that's really scary to low-income families. Like, no one's going to sign a 20-year, 25-year contract. Even though that is the closest thing to say, how do we do this? What are the terms for the off-takers? And what I was saying as a grassroots organizer, please get rid of those long-term contracts. You need to make sure that it's accessible to the average person, even if it's in their benefit, because reality is you have these long-term contracts and there's no catch, and you're guaranteeing your savings to someone who's already been, targeted with crazy marketing through other scams and energy saving companies. They're not going to believe it. And so making the language and the product offering from the finance side it was a huge learning curve for every state. And just now coming in, it's just like, hey, what's the market? What are you guys doing? And just jumping right in. Don't start from scratch. Like, look at where the market is at. The market is not requiring credit scores. I was advocating for that. That's now a non-issue. So now when you have a product in community solar, no one is doing long-term contracts anymore. The market corrected itself once they saw that no one was signing up with those ridiculous terms. They were really scary. You got rid of the cancellation fees. You got rid of the escalators. All of that is like, no, model this is close to what people are doing by just paying their normal utility bill. Get rid of all of this extra stuff. So that would also be what I would say is working now is, there had to be 2-3 years of growing pains and coming back to, hey, what the market wants. And so any new policy that's being implemented now can just jump right in and say, what are the average terms in the states that are existing? And those are really where the terms are now. And you don't have to start from scratch and doing the, what's working, what's not working. And yeah, so you get to learn from all the other jurisdictions woes.
Thank you for that. I'm going to kick it back to State Rep Rachel Hood to speak a little bit about the legislation piece here in Michigan around rooftop solar, and also talking about the barriers that we see when it comes to rooftop solar currently here in Michigan, and also a new legislation that was introduced a couple months back called Keep the Power On or Pay Up.
Okay. So rooftop solar in Michigan has slowly taken off, and I think could use a lot of help. In Michigan, our energy is really highly regulated. We have 2 regulated utility companies that are public utilities. They're also vertically integrated companies that deliver coal to Michigan, in the case of DTE specifically. And so it's been very difficult to move forward common sense legislation that would expand solar in Michigan and would, really signal to the market that Michigan is ready to do large scale solar. And I mean, really welcome the solar market, in addition to doing large-scale solar projects that the utilities may undertake. Representative Markkanen introduced a bill that would lift the solar cap in Michigan, which I believe is currently set at 1%, and this would lift it to 3%, if I am getting that, recalling that data correctly. And it would allow for more community members to choose rooftop solar. Right now, if you want rooftop solar, you have to either pay for that privately, pay for your connection to the utility grid, which is about a $20,000 cost, or you need to be part of a ongoing raffle system that the utilities have, where you may be chosen for the utilities to invest that $20,000 connection between your home and the grid. So it's very difficult to do rooftop solar without making a significant financial investment in those capital pieces that are necessary. And then we have House Bills 6043 through 6047. You mentioned these, Wesley, and these bills would require utilities to compensate customers for the costs of outages and would require regulators to hold evidentiary hearings on electrical distribution plans. So across the state, we are struggling with lack of reliability and delivery of energy from our utility companies. And we see that here in West Michigan, in my own neighborhood, we had some significant problems with this as it related to consumers' energy for a couple of years. Those have gotten better, but we do see regular outages still. In Metro Detroit and in the city of Detroit, this is a significant issue that continues to significantly harm folks, especially during major flood events. We've been, of course, seeing more of those dramatic weather events as a result of, more intense, more frequent storms attributed to climate change hitting Michigan. So to dive a little more deeply and more detailed into the House bills, 6043 would require electrical utilities to automatically credit the bills of residential customers for outages at a rate that increases for longer outages. House Bill 6044 would prohibit electrical utilities from passing the cost of an outage compensation onto the customers for higher rates. House Bill 6045 would require the utilities to automatically provide additional compensation to electrical customers who experience multiple outages. 6046 would require the utilities to disclose information about the number and duration of outages on a customer's bill. So it's very clear how much, when outages happened, et cetera. And then House Bill 6047 would require electric utilities to file their distribution investment and maintenance plan as a contested case with the Michigan Public Service Commission, so that this information would be part of reliability planning processes that are transparent to the public.
Thank you for that update. Any other legislation on the community solar front that you could speak about?
Related to community solar and other solar investments, I did recently introduce a bill around requiring prevailing wage for clean energy projects in Michigan. So this would allow union contractors to be more competitive in their bid processes to hopefully deliver their highly skilled workforce to the development of clean energy in Michigan.
Thank you for that. Jacquelyn, I want to kick it to you next, just to speak about what's at stake when it comes to communities of color, particularly Black folks, on how we can get involved within the EJ space, and how can we change the conversation of how funding and other things happen within the environmental sustainability space.
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. So part of what I was thinking and doing research on was, like, it was mentioned, and I took some notes about how people get into the community power or community solar. So if it's community based, where say it's a group that comes together for the community and they decide that they want to create a solar energy company, then they have the benefit of controlling the pricing. But one of the questions that I have is that if when companies establish themselves in the community as the solar energy provider and the customers sign up for it, then they still get billed from the electricity company. And they also then have to pay a fee based off of the savings. They have to pay that back to the solar energy provider. Is that, I'm going to ask that to WeSolar. Is that the right understanding of how this works in the real world, as far as creating opportunities for community solar?
Yeah, that is a loaded question because what you're talking about is two different models. And so that is what's at play here. So let's just rewind. There's a model, for instance, in Maryland where it's two bills. The community solar customer will pay that community group, and they will still get a bill from their utility, but the utility bill is discounted because they've already paid for their electricity in theory. Will they still have to pay some fees, like the transmission fees and the customer service fees that don't really have anything to do with the utility, the electricity part that they're paying for? Yes, but they do receive in total that savings that was guaranteed. Now, as far as fees being associated with the community solar subscription, you do have models like in Florida where, in order to get, because it's vertically integrated and it's not community owned, it's utility owned, in order to receive community solar, there is like a $300 fee to be a part of that community solar farm. So it really just depends on the model.
Okay, so that's important that the community understands the different models that are at play. Because when we think about, okay, we're going to be able to save, if you're in a sunny area and you tend to have sunny days more often than not, save on your electricity bill. But then you turn around and I believe it says solar credits might exceed your electricity consumption, but then you still would have to be obligated to pay the solar company for the credit assigned to your account. So and you're saving, but then you still end up paying the solar company for the energy that you save. That is what I need clarity on. Like, how?
Yeah. So what you're talking about is historical usage, and essentially what most community solar companies do is that they undersubscribe to avoid that. So, and of course, you're going to have some months where your portion of the solar farm is going to generate more than you use, but it's going to balance out, like true up at the end of the year, because there's going to be some times in the year where you don't use as much, or vice versa. You're going to use more energy than what you produce because your subscription didn't produce that. So what they do is they look at the total amount of what you produced in the year, and typically they will only subscribe you to about 80% of your overall annual usage. So your actual subscription in the farm should never exceed your usage. So let's say if you spend $100 each month, you spend about $1,200 in a year. Technically, your subscription will only be about $800, right? Or $900. We would go slightly under. So you're still going to have that remainder on your actual utility bill, which you would not get a discount for, just so you're not oversubscribed to the solar farm. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And those are the things that, for me, that would be of concern for the community to get of it and down into the
weeds,
so that they understand what's really at stake. So they're not expecting they're not expecting what they shouldn't expect.
Right.
But that they deserve, what they're entitled to by signing up for it. And the other issue that I think will affect communities, especially low-income families, is that if WeSolar is the first in the nation to be a African solar company, I don't even know of any other. I didn't even know that WeSolar was African American owned until today. So let's think about like the providers of solar. Then we think about, what does it take to get solar? It has to be installed. Who's doing the installing? Who's doing the creation of the solar panels and all the things that it would take to get the solar panels installed? So we still could be left out of this new emergence of green energy and clean energy and this new emerging area that's opening up where wealth can be clearly established by those who are in it first.
Yeah.
And so those are the types of issues that not only I have, but other people are asking this question too. How can we get more folks of color represented in this area? Not just being solar panel recipients, but being installers, being repairers, being owners, and even within the community sector, having the community own it. And I know community power is the big energy companies are like, oh no, we're not having that. But those are the areas that we know are going to continue to impact us, and therefore we miss out on being able to establish wealth and move from being low income to moderate to high income earners. So that's where it is. And to me, I'm not going to say it's simple, but I'm an accountant. And when things don't add up, whenever you do a debit on one side, there has to be a credit on the other side for things to balance. And so far in the solar industry, it's not balancing.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. There was a very troubling report that came out through the solar energy industry that reported like over 95% of solar executives are white male and own and dominated. And so yeah, I would say policy, right? So you need policy on education, even with community solar. So the technical aspects of understanding the double billing and the credits. If you don't have outreach and education, even after implementing community solar, you're still going to see, even with the right intentions in the pilot program, a disparity as far as who signs up, because you still need policy around the education of the policy. That's one. And then obviously, yeah, jobs, right? Academia, that's on academia, that's on government. When the college grads that's graduating in 2023, unfortunately, they're not equipped to jump into this renewable energy space. I graduated in 2011 undergrad, but 7-8 years later, the policy passed, right? And so what's happening is that the private sector is moving at lightning speed, and the institutions that's in charge of creating their certifications and the executives, the financing, the law, that's still being created, right? Or it hasn't even been done yet. So there needs to be these policies that connect the fellowships or the internships with the developers in real time. So there's no lag in I would say labor, right? Because you need to have a highly skilled force to really do this work. But if there's just this lack of the HBCUs or the community colleges aren't really connected to the private sector, then obviously the same old will continue being the developers and the owners and choosing the contractors. And that's how they keep the wealth. It's the education part, but you need to have policy making sure that those certifications and the workforce development is incentivized. And say, hey guys, we have a grant. Whoever can create this workforce development, creating that private sector to the institution pipeline, get this money so we can keep this flow of economics in these concentrated areas and frontline communities. Folks will be writing all types of programs to figure out that solution. So again, policy is always the center in solution to we know the problems that we have. And we also know the solutions is always the idea of the lack of resources or funding.
I got a follow-up question. State Rep Rachel Hood, I know you spoke a little bit about the bill. You said to focus in on union jobs. Could you speak a little bit about what the workforce development piece looks like when it comes to community solar and clean renewable energy here in Michigan? Particularly, with our governor released the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan a couple weeks ago, and in that plan, she installed the Justice 40 initiative for Michigan, and where 40% of investments within environmental go to underserved communities. Could you speak a little bit about that and the big piece on how can we get communities of color involved within that workforce development here in Michigan?
Yeah, sadly, I mean, in comparison to what we are hearing from Kristal and WeSolar about what is happening in DC, and then similarly what is happening in San Diego and in other parts of the country, Michigan just doesn't have the solar jobs that other states do because, again, because we have, really allowed our utilities to block progress in this industry and drive the conversation legislatively over the last several years and in really decades. But as it pertains to this issue, I would say we've been working on this for 15 years or more in pursuit of opening up clean energy field and jobs and the green economy in Michigan, and we're just not there yet. Workforce development wise, we are spending more money in our budget to encourage people to move into technical careers. The pendulum swang, focusing heavily on driving all of our kids into traditional four-year colleges. And now it is swinging back to better accommodate the trades, and that I think creates some new opportunities for young people to self-identify and go into those spaces. But we do not have robust solar training programs. We do not have robust wind training programs in Michigan. Because the market is very controlled by our utilities. The utilities are hiring, and like many industries, they have seen an enormous shift to the baby boomer population moving into retirement, and these jobs are available, and moving through training through the electrical workers trade unions, or maybe through some community college programs, provides you with entrance to those entry level energy jobs in the utility sector. The Justice 40 work is monumental for Michigan, and it will certainly focus a lot of our interventions in communities that have been disproportionately harmed by environmental harms by companies that have created victims of their neighbors and neighborhoods. So we will see more resources going into those communities, and I hope that once we do open up the solar industry a little bit wider in Michigan, that it provides that onboarding of individuals from environmental justice communities to begin to play a significant role in the clean energy economy here in Michigan.
Thank you for that. My next question, I want to kick it back to Kristal. And Kristal, you spoke a little bit about the just transition. Could you give a little context of what is just transition, and also what is the status of workforce and job training for clean renewable jobs?
Was that to me? I'm sorry.
Yes, that was to me.
I was saying that, the environmental justice, stemmed out of the 70s with a focus on the intersectionality of, yes, we have to do something about offsetting our carbon footprint, but we also understand that communities of color have always dealt with the brunt end of other issues like racism and redlining and stuff like that. And so the just transition is just making sure that the justice component is a part of this, what folks are calling the fourth industrial revolution, and making sure that those communities that have been targeted in all sections of this of our economy is a part of that equation, and bringing equity and these buzzwords that we see just full circle. So that would be my answer to that. And what was the second part of the answer?
The
question.
workforce development within the clean renewable sector?
Yeah, I think that's also what Representative Rachel Hood was saying. In most states, the utilities are the gatekeepers, and without legislation or without favorable state, politics, then you don't really have that like robust, workforce development. And so I would say one workaround is exactly what Representative Hood said, is there's a lot of transferable skills right now. And when you look at like EV charging, when you look at the EV cars that's coming out, and the new battery market that's changing in the technology, or even on the installation side, on the legal side, on the accounting side, the analyst side, what I would say, even if you don't have the favorable laws, is that workforce, the solar industry, the renewable energy industry still needs every single skill set. So if you're a mechanic, or if you're studying, the new cars and your mechanical trade school, or not, or if you're a traditional mechanic, then you should still go after your certifications, even if you don't have a lot of like EV port stations now, because you could and you will see that on the interstate, right? And you can be the first person to set up an EV mechanical shop there because you have the skills to do so. So follow the technology, even if it's not being, if it's not robust in your state. But if you have if you're an electrician and you may not have a robust, workforce development, certification outside of what training the utilities may do once you get the job, I would say stay on top of your studies and see how very closely your trade is connected to the renewable energy sector, and go online and YouTube's and just, if it's create, I guess, like be a student of the field, like being really proactive, because a lot of those jobs are like, what was said, a direct connection. And maybe go after some online schools. There are some schools you may have to travel or talk to some the certification programs that's in other states, or lobby some your state legislators to say, hey, we can do some of this programming at the state level. If it's not there, it has to be done. It has to be created, and utilities don't have to drive workforce development. But also academia, there's a awakening to saying, hey, like, as we shift to more trade jobs, and that's the focus, like, why don't we just model what's happening in the country, or what other groups you have, like Grid Alternatives, that's a nonprofit that's leading the charge. You got Power 52 and Rob Wallace Group that's leading the charge. These nonprofits that's doing the work and have their certifications. And I would say they're regionally at the moment, but clearly that is a formula that can be duplicated and replicated nationwide. And that's policy saying, hey, get Grid here, get Power 52 here, get a WeSolar here, get these experts here. Let's create these curriculums, because there's people doing it. But you need to be incentivized, and you have to have capital in order to do that. So it's just mostly not recreating the wheel, but looking at the wheels that already have been tested and proven, and then identifying that, right? The community always understands where the pain points are, and also always have the solutions, just funding it and creating the policy around it.
Thank you for that. That was so powerful. The NAACP a couple of weeks ago hosted a Black Business Roundtable, and EV was a central point within the conversation that we were having, and how can we capitalize on getting EV charging stations and creating businesses within Black-owned EV stations. And so thank you for sharing that, Kristal. Next question is, we're going to wrap up here shortly. Any closing remarks that we have from the panelists? We'll kick it off to State Rep Rachel Hood first, then Jacquelyn, then round it out with Kristal.
Yeah, I want to empower folks to really get involved in pushing for clean energy in Michigan and also electing representatives who will do the same, who are committed to it and clean energy economy in Michigan looks like. We have waited for too long at, guided by a Republican majority in the state House and in the state Senate, who have failed to deliver a real robust clean energy economy to the state of Michigan. But we know it's time. The big three are calling us to move forward rapidly on EVs and on smart roads and on mobility. And we need to be there for them. And a part of that work is going to be standing up new energy delivery models so that we can support folks as they purchase EVs and deliver that clean energy solution. What we need folks to do is get engaged in the 2022 election and see to it that their values are represented in the legislature. And here in West Michigan and in Kent County, the road to a new majority in the state House and the state Senate comes right through our communities. And we really have to take advantage of this moment after the census and after redistricting to make sure that our values are represented in Lansing and that we can get it together and send the right signals to the national market, to the international market, that Michigan is ready for clean energy and that we are preparing to step up and back that and have our values reflected in budgets. As the two other guests have so eloquently noted, it's critical that those values are there, and that we have policymakers who will lead us and guide us forward into the 21st century. Thank you.
Kick it to Jacquelyn next.
Okay, I didn't want to jump in, and I didn't know if you were going to have remarks. So, and for me, being a person that wants to get our people, the community, more engaged, more involved, more accountable to do their part in this whole energy, solar, climate, environmental arena, is to to participate and collaborate with established organizations, because we don't have to invent the wheel. So one of the things we did here in San Diego recently was we had Electrify Your Life. We did an electrification event where we had EVs that people could come, they could sign up, they could learn about the EV, then they could test drive it. We had induction cookware and induction cooktops where people can learn about energy saving cookware that will help reduce the cost of their bills at home. We had them learn about what it looks like, their energy bill. Now, we have Sempra Energy and locally San Diego Gas and Electric. So they got a chance to look at the breakdown of their bill so they could understand where their energy costs are soaring and what months and why. So doing things like that, where we're having community events that educate and bring awareness to energy saving techniques, is very important. But also on the flip side of that is like the sister from I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, but from WeSolar mentioned grid alternatives. We have grid alternatives here in San Diego, and they actually did do a workforce partnership type of training or collaboration with the state of California, so that they have programs where they are training folks to go out and be able and be prepared to work in these green areas, to work in solar, to work in anything that is going to be the opposite of what we're doing now. So grid alternatives is an excellent idea to see how you can bring them to your state or getting involved in a collaborative project with them, because as we said, without reinventing the wheel, you can collaborate and you can kind of farm out some of these activities if the state can't do it, but they can certainly set aside funding for it. They can help in that area so that we can get a workforce that is ready for these types of things like battery storage. What happens when these EVs break down? Who's fixing them? Who's geared up to repair them? You can't necessarily take them to a regular car dealership or whatever if they don't, and they may not have, or they may have limited staff that's able to repair these types of things. But for me, it's about awareness and continuing to reach the people, because if I don't know that I'm directly impacted by air pollution and poor air quality, and I'm at the top of the list for health inequities, how am I going to improve? How am I going to be accountable? How am I going to know what my role is? It's good to collect data, but the data on the people and the demographics that we collect data from have to be informed, especially if we find out that things are being harmful and towards them. So that's what I have. I mean, I have more, but I don't want to rant. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. We'll kick it to Kristal last.
Just thank you for the invite. It's been a pleasure to powwow with my fellow panelists. I would just say, don't be discouraged. You have policy that came out of North Carolina, right? And they passed a nice, robust solar, sweeping solar legislation, and really look at, what they did. They really narrow down on the jobs aspect. And so if you have like some political things you need to climb, look at some of the conservative states to see like the language in their bills to get over those hurdles. And even in Maryland, right, on the Eastern Shore, and some of the county was really conservative. Community solar is bipartisan for the most part. Because a lot of the conservatives and agricultural farmers realize that, we can have like generational residual income without having to work as hard. So that was also a play where they were able to get some of the conservative farmers and run the numbers. The solar companies lobby the conservative constituents on the ground and saying, hey, did you know? So they realized that they were actually on the wrong side of the fence. When they saw how they could directly like benefit from that, and having those land leases and solar on their land, when they were really like suffering during the pandemic and trying to hold on to their land and trying to figure out how they can stay competitive. And so also just going directly to the Public Service Commission boards and having the community partitions and surveys and showing the momentum, put some pressure due to public service commissioners. So I would say just don't give up, but also look at what other states that may represent some of your legislative makeup, because there are like conservative states that got it done.
Thank you for that. I do want to point out we do have a question from the audience. And the question is, how many homes/businesses could have all their electrical needs met with 5 megawatts and with 20 megawatts? That's a technical question that I have no knowledge of.
And I saw that question in there, and I didn't know that offhand, but I did look up something, and it says, this is just a snippet. It says, to put that number in perspective, the Solar Energy Industries Association, a U.S. trade association, calculates that on average, 1 megawatt of solar power generates enough electricity to meet the needs of 164 U.S. homes. So if you're asking about, the question was about 5.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, so 1 megawatt is 164 homes.
Wow.
So that's about 820 homes for 5 megawatts.
That's a lot.
Wow.
That's a little area of the city that I live in here.
Wow. Well, thank you for taking that answer on, Jacquelyn, and looking that information up. The next question we have, last question is, I would love some detail about the ability or inability to create independent utilities power sources through Indian tribes in Michigan.
Yeah, we're starting to look into that. We've been empowering the tribes in Michigan on the Line 5 fight and learning more. There are tribes that are interested and have tribal lands where solar could be developed. So great question, and one that we are exploring. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to our office, and you can track along with us.
I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank everybody who attended and watched this amazing conversation this evening. This was a powerful conversation. Some takeaways, education, awareness, and literacy. It's big on the solar and community solar aspect. The time is now. The time is now for the community to get involved, particularly here in Michigan. Here in Michigan, we have a surplus in our budget right now from the state, and also a surplus of funds coming in for the federal government. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to get involved. So please make your voices be heard to your legislators. Give them a call. We have our state rep, Rachel Hood, here. Give your legislator a call and just advocate on what you want to see in your community and in your environment. Also here in the city of Grand Rapids, we have the Presbyterian Budget Committee, and the city is offering money for the community to give ideas of what you want to do with that money. And so please get involved at the local level on how you can see the things that you want to see in your community. And also with the NAACP Environmental Caucus Committee, if anybody that was watching the stream that wants to join the committee and get more information, please send an email to info@naacpgr.com. And for that, have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you so much.